Hello and welcome to another weekly update. A couple of things to talk about this week. They all seem to come in right at the end of the week, which is kind of good because it means that this update is bang up to date. So first of those is a blog post I did earlier today. And the big news this week, certainly in the Microsoft world, is the confirmation of the rumours around what's happening with Microsoft Edge. Specifically that the rendering engine in Edge is going to move over to be Chromium, which is the same rendering engine that's used in Google Chrome. Now, just to kind of dispel a couple of the myths, this doesn't mean that Edge is going to become Chrome. It's purely the rendering engine, and Chromium is actually an open source project, and Microsoft already contribute to Chromium. They're going to step up those contributions, I imagine, as they step away from their own in-house rendering engine, which by the way started off with its roots in Internet Explorer, the Trident rendering engine, and then got forked to become I think Edge HTML it was called, kind of on from there. So anyway, the blog post I did was, well, that's great, but what does that mean to developers? Because that's kind of what I care about, for Skype for Business, for Teams developers. What does that mean? Well, really, the most obvious application where this causes an issue is in audio video processing and display on web pages. In the Skype for Business world, you can do that with the Skype Web SDK, so you can embed Skype for Business capabilities into your web page, into your website, and you can join meetings, you can make calls, and you can display video and audio in the web. There are some caveats to that. If you want to do that without a plugin today, you have to use Edge, and that's because it has been developed using ORTC, which is not quite the same as WebRTC. It's kind of like an earlier version, but not really. It's supported without plugins in Edge. It's supported with plugins in Internet Explorer and Safari, and it is not supported in Chrome. So the biggest first concern is, okay, I've developed applications in the Skype Web SDK. I have users using them in Edge, and I've forced users onto using Edge in order to use these applications. Edge is moving over to Chromium. What's going to happen to those Skype Web SDK applications? The honest answer is we're not too sure, but the assumption is they're going to stop working. So that's the first thing to kind of be aware of. I have reached out to Microsoft for some clarification on this. I imagine it's all a little bit too early. But we'll see this stuff come out and get clarified, as we go along, and probably, hopefully, before Edge actually moves over, because nothing's going to happen until Q1 next year at the earliest, anyway. The same kind of scenario is actually kind of positive, really, for Teams. There isn't a way of embedding Teams capabilities inside web pages by developers at the moment, but if that comes in the future, actually knowing that it's going to have to come to the Chromium engine in order to actually work anywhere means that it's going to work on Chrome and Edge at the same time, which is really good. It means we're not going to have that same kind of situation that we have with Skype for Business, where it came out, but it came out in Edge and it stayed in Edge and it never went on to the more mainstream browsers. So that's all kind of really cool. Another blog post I've been kind of writing all through this week, but only pressed publish on earlier today, is around something entirely new and different in the bot space, and that's the Microsoft Healthcare bot, which you may or may not have heard of. I've talked previously about Microsoft being in healthcare and healthcare being an important place for Microsoft to be. Well, they've developed and made available a healthcare bot. So this is a bot that can do initial triage. It will talk to patients, ask their symptoms, try and figure out what's wrong with them, and based on that, have a suggested course of action, be that referral, sort of self-care at home, talking to a doctor, or immediate, go and phone an ambulance, go to a hospital, whatever. And it's built on some kind of available data, so it's not like something you've got to build up from scratch. It comes kind of fully populated. It comes with a workflow engine, comes ready to hand off to human beings. It's got loads and loads of stuff in it. It's more than just, hey, you can use a bot. No, this is an actual product. We've productized the ability to do bots in healthcare. So it's very interesting. I've done a part 1 blog post this week which is really just introducing it, going through the features, going through the costs. There is a sample on there that you can actually interact with. You can actually talk to the bot and get a feel for what it can do. There's going to be future parts, so there's a part 2 coming out next week, which is about how to install it, and then a future part, well, 3 I guess, about how you configure it, and I think that'll probably be it, unless I find some really more interesting stuff along the way that warrants a parts 4 and 5. So that's really interesting if you're in the healthcare space, to go and look at and see if this is a useful thing, and it's interesting for everybody who, you know, is anything to do with bots or anything to do with healthcare, really, to kind of see what's possible now and what the technology can do. Speaking of which, a nice segue onto a really powerful blog post actually that Brad Smith, president, put out. I'm not sure how much of it he wrote, but it's got his name on the byline, so that's the important thing. And it's around facial recognition. Now, I've talked about facial recognition in Microsoft Cognitive Services before. This blog post is, I'll summarise it for you at a really high level, though it's a long blog post, but it's absolutely worth reading. What Microsoft are saying is, you know, facial recognition is changing the way we work, the way we think, but we have to really make sure we get it right in terms of diversity and inclusion, ethnicity and gender. It's very, very easy to lock people out of technological shifts like this because you couldn't be bothered to make an inclusive platform, literally a service that works for everyone. That requires effort at this point. You know, when you're making these breakthroughs in facial recognition technology, it is super important to make sure you include all demographics in in the kind of solution, and not exclude people just because you didn't think of them or you couldn't be bothered, or, to take it to the capitalist nth degree, you didn't think they were worth enough. And really what Microsoft are saying is, we can't wait for government to kind of come up with legislation on this because it's going to happen way too late. The right thing to do is for big companies to step in and set some sensible ground rules, and Microsoft is stepping up and saying, we will be that company that set the ground rules in place that define how we're going to do this ethically and properly, and put in a template for others to follow. So yeah, it's a really good thing. It's everything that's right about Microsoft at the moment is doing, you know, it's doing the right thing. It's putting the commitment in place to just use technology sensibly, to use it ethically, and for the good of everyone. And yeah, it's brilliant. You should definitely go and read it. It's good. Finally, more of a, well, it might be good if you can't sleep, I suppose. I'm not sure how useful it's going to be, but I think you should definitely go and look at it. So if you're a developer, you've most probably, hopefully, have heard of John Skeet, famous Stack Overflow answerer, and fellow technologist in the UK. He was suggested a challenge as a fundraiser to read the C# draft specification, Jackanory style. So if you're not from the UK, Jackanory style, basically reading it from an armchair in front of a roaring fire. It's what we grew up with as kids. Anyway, he reached the first, then the second, then the third target, I believe. So there is an amazing 1 hour and 22 minute video of John Skeet sitting by a fire reading the C# draft specification. So it's absolutely worth going and having a look, having a laugh, maybe if you can't sleep, putting it on. But then also in the description for the YouTube page there is a link to his sponsorship page. So the GoFundMe is definitely still open. At the point at which I am writing this, it has raised just over £4,000, so that's $7,000, something like that. So there's definitely more that can be done. It must have taken him I can't imagine reading the draft spec full stop, let alone doing it out loud for an hour and a half. So he is to be applauded. Right, that's all from me. Have a great weekend, and have a great week next week, and I'll talk to you again next time.